As I said earlier, Advent is a season of waiting. And waiting, in particular, for God to show up. And often in this waiting, we realize and learn that God shows up when God wants to show up. God shows up how God deems he should show up, not when we want him to, not always when in the ways that we want him to. And one thing this does is it makes our relationship with God sometimes difficult. Because every relationship needs reinforcement, needs reinforcing. Every relationship has a little bit of the mentality, what have you done for me lately? And we wish this wasn't always the case. Every parent, particularly every mom, wishes that their children knew how much they have already sacrificed for them since before they were born. Going through pregnancy, of birth itself. But as parents, we know we can't just say, look, if you had any idea what I went through, right, that doesn't work. We have to do acts of love again and again to reinforce again and again that we love and care for our children. This is true of romantic partners. You know, a wife says to her husband, hey, I don't feel like you're caring for me in this season, in these last few months. The husband can't fire back, yeah, but remember that thing I did on Valentine's like 5 years ago? Clearly I love you. Right? That's not how it works. And again, this makes our relationship with God sometimes tricky. Because on one hand, we know and are often reminded and remind ourselves what God did for us long ago. How God created us, created the whole world and all that's in it. How God redeemed us in his Son through his life, death, and resurrection. And yet there are moments and seasons where we find ourselves going, yeah, but God, do you care about me today? Do you care about me now? And sometimes the response to that is nothing, and we're just stuck waiting. And this is what we're going to explore this morning as we continue our series, The Mothers of Jesus. This comes from the beginning of Matthew's gospel where he lays out the lineage from Abraham to Jesus. Now, normally lineages or genealogies at this time, it would include just the men. It would say, father had this son, who had this son, who had this son, who had this son. But Matthew, in his lineage, he includes 5 women, and he names 4 of them. And we're looking at a different woman, one of the women that he names each week. And this morning, we're going to look at Rahab. And we're going to see how she is a woman who waits. Something happens, and then she waits some more, which is really a reflection of our lives. And my hope this morning is that we'd be encouraged that while we wait, that we would have trust and faith that God is at work. And I actually believe that if we took the time to look around, we might actually see that what we've been waiting for, or part of what we've been waiting for, is right in front of us. So to do this, we're going to read this text from Joshua chapter 2 and see in it, or explore in it, the grace given to Rahab, the grace given to the spies, and this sheds light on God's grace given to us today. So here are these words from the book that we love. It's Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 through 24. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. He said, go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab. Bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the two kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. So she said to them, "Go to the hills, so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, and then go on your way." Now the men had said to her, "This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into your house. If any of them go outside your house into the street, their blood will be on their own heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the two men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua son of Nun and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given the whole land into our hands. All the people are melting in fear because of us." Okay, a little bit of a longer story, but it's a whole story. And if we begin by looking at Rahab, we see that she has a history. She has a background. She is a Canaanite. This is the story of Israel when they're getting ready to finally enter the promised land after wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And the promised land is currently occupied by Canaanites, of which Rahab is one. Next, we read that she's a prostitute. And this is the only way to understand this is the way that it's understood, is that she was a prostitute. We don't know anything else. We don't know why she became that. More than likely, like people of today, that's not a first choice of somebody's job, but it's something that she felt like she fell into. But the result of this we see in our text, which is that she now lives as an outcast. Right? She's marginalized by the very definition of the term. She's on the outskirts of the town. Her house, her dwelling place is literally built into the wall. She can't get pushed out any more than she already is. She's somebody that the rest of society wants to forget, wishes wasn't there. And this is who Rahab is when at some point she hears some good news. At some point, she hears about this God of Israel, and it's clear from our text that she hears about it long before the spies ever come. Because when she talks to the spies, she tells them, "I'm afraid, we're afraid because of what your God has done. We've heard how your God had dried up the Red Sea when you fled Egypt." And this is something that happened over 40 years ago. And then she mentions something else, that we've heard of what your God has done, how you have defeated the king of the Amorites, Og and Sihon. And then she ends by making essentially a profession of faith. This is the end of verse 11. She says, "The Lord your God is God in heaven above and on the earth below." And so she is at this place where she hears this good news, places faith, not in the God of the Canaanites, but in the God of Israel, who she believes is the true God, the God in heaven above and the earth below. And then she's just stuck and forced to wait. There's really nothing else that she can do to act on this faith. She's still an outcast. She's still a prostitute. She's still a Canaanite. And she's just sitting there waiting, wondering, what should I do with this faith? And then one day, these spies show up. Now, just so you have the right image in your mind, when you hear spies in Joshua, don't picture, somebody in a trench coat and, secretly hiding or in camouflage. Spies in this time were kind of twofold. They were, on one hand, to survey the land. We read Joshua doing that. We read the king of Jericho saying they're exploring the land. That's true, but they're also there to spread information to those who exist in Canaan, to those who are living in Jericho, to say to them, we're coming. And this is a chance for people to flee, to run away, but it's a twofold thing. And so the spies end up at Rahab's, which again makes sense in some regard because her house is literally in the wall. And we read that while they are there, and almost it seems like right when they get there, the king of Jericho knows that these spies are coming. And for whatever reason, he knows or believes that they're at Rahab's place. And so he sends men after them. And this is, in some ways, what Rahab's been waiting for. She's been waiting for a way to express her faith. And she has it. And so she hides the spies on the roof. She deceives the pursuers who are after them. So after waiting, she has this opportunity to live out her faith. But then we hear this interaction she has with the spies where she wants safety, she wants security when Israel finally comes and they work out this deal. They say, that's fine, we'll do this, our life's for your life. You've saved us, we'll save you. Tie this scarlet cord, and you and anyone else in your household who's in this house when we come will be saved. And at this point, I want us to imagine that we're Rahab. Rahab's sitting here, and she has this thing that she has to wait for. She has to wait for the spies to come again, and they may not come. She's made herself kind of a target in her own community. The king knows that she's helped these spies, or at least has done something, probably isn't being truthful. And on top of that, while she's waiting, she's given a very difficult task, which is not just to wait for herself, but she's to convince her family to wait with her. This family, again, we have no idea, but typically somebody who's a prostitute is an outcast from her family. She's to convince them to come and wait with her. And you can imagine them at the house saying, are you sure these guys are coming? Or more than that, are you sure they're going to hold up their end of the bargain? We have no power here. And yet she's stuck waiting and hoping that maybe that these guys that she's trusted herself to, because it's not just about her trusting God, it's about her trusting these people that God has brought to her. And thankfully we read that eventually, if you read on in Joshua, that they come and they do keep her word and saves Rahab and her family. So that's the story of Rahab, but the story in this text isn't just about Rahab. It's also about the spies. And we see the spies, we see a similar pattern. The spies, they too have a history. Now it's different than Rahab. We don't know the names of the spies. We don't know any of the personal information about them, but we do know that they come carrying a burden of history with them because they're not the first spies to spy out the land for the people of Israel. If we read back in the book of Numbers, shortly after Israel's fled Egypt, we read that Moses picks 12 men, one man from each tribe, to spy out the land, the promised land that God is going to give them. And these spies, they go out and they explore the land, they cut off the fruit of the land and they bring it back and they say, the land is amazing, the land is flowing with milk and honey. Here, taste of this amazing fruit that's there. But then 10 of the spies say, but we can't take the land. They say, but the people who live there are powerful and the cities are fortified and very large. And God's response to these 10 spies is to say, fine, then you will not inherit the land. I will wait for you to die because of your lack of faith. Now, 2 of the spies had faith that God would do what he promised. They were Caleb and Joshua. Joshua, the same Joshua we read, who's the one that sends out the 2 spies in our text. So these spies come with this burden of history on their shoulders. They come knowing that there are those who have gone before them who failed the task because of what they saw, these mighty cities. And what do they see when they get to Jericho? They see a mighty, fortified city. And so they, with fear and trepidation, enter into Rahab's house. And again, it reads as if, just as they're getting there, they hear that there are some king's men after them. And they're forced to trust themselves to this woman that they just met to hide them. And they're waiting with fear. But then they too hear good news. Not just the good news that the men are gone, that Rahab has deceived the pursuers, but the good news that Rahab tells them that she and all the people are afraid, that they are melting with fear because they've all heard what the God of Israel has done for them. And this is beyond encouraging. This is better news than what they could have hoped for or imagined. And this gives them confidence to say what they say to Joshua, that the Lord has surely delivered Jericho into their hands. But again, before they can really act on this good news, what are they forced to do? They're forced to wait. They're forced to go out into the hills and wait for 3 days. And again, they're forced to trust themselves not just to God, but to this person that God has brought into their lives. This person that said, hey, you go into the hills and I'll tell them nothing about you. Wait until they come back after 3 days, then you should be able to cross. And the spies are forced to trust themselves to this person that they just met. And again, we read that Rahab is faithful to them. And as we look at these two stories, the story of Rahab, the story of the spies, we realize this is the story of us. That all of us have a history that we carry with us. We have our personal backgrounds of where we're from, of what we've done, of what we left undone, of pain we've endured, of joyful things we've enjoyed. And we also carry a history of those who have gone before us. Those who have set the bar either for expectations or fears. And within this history we carry, we also have all heard and experienced the God who has acted in history. We've heard that good news, the good news of what God has done long ago. We do know the story of the Exodus, but we don't typically point back to that. The Exodus, the drying up of the river or the Red Sea, or the defeat of these earthly kings that we read about in our text. But instead, no, we point to the cross. We point to this moment where God said, my life for your life. And the death and resurrection of his son. And a moment where Jesus didn't defeat any earthly king, but Jesus defeated the prince of darkness. And as we hear these good news in the midst of our history, yet we still have these moments where we're not sure what to do with it. We're not sure how we're to act on this good news, and we're often stuck waiting. And sometimes we, like Rahab, hear these moments of good news again. And so again, sometimes we're stuck waiting. In other moments, we have times to act. And this waiting, it's like the spies, but there's nothing to do. The spies in the hills can just wait and pray. That's all they could do is wait and pray. But other times, we wait like Rahab waited. She waited knowing that there was nothing she could do to make the spies come back any quicker. But she was given a task. The task of convincing her family and friends and those close to her to wait with her. And this all started because God showed up in unexpected ways. And so I think the question that this text asks of us as readers is this: are our eyes open to the grace of God that may be coming to us in unexpected ways? Are our eyes open to the grace of God that may be coming to us in unexpected ways? Because think again of these characters. Think of Rahab. She's heard of the God of Israel. She knows that Israel's coming, and they're coming to destroy her city. And she's wondering, what can she do as somebody who's placed faith in the God of Israel? She can't manufacture this meeting. She can't go out and find them. Or even if she could, there's no guarantee they're going to receive her well. She's just stuck waiting. And yet what happens? One day, these two spies stumble into her place. And consider the spies. The spies who are coming with great fear and trepidation, not knowing what they're really going to discover, and seeing at first their fears realize that the first spies were right, that yes, this land is full of these mighty and fortified cities. And so they stumble in fear, and they stumble into the one place where there's a person who's made faith in the living God. And so what we see is this is how God works, that the grace we need for our next step often comes from unexpected people in our life. So what does this mean for us? Well, one, I think it means in part coming to terms with what has brought us to this moment. Coming to terms with our own history. Often we can get stuck in living in a life of regret or blame. This often looks like, if only. If only I hadn't done this. It's regret. Or it's blame, where it says, if only they or you hadn't done that. And that doesn't help us. We have to come to terms with where we are, that we are here now, that God has brought us to this place. Second, we need to consider, what does it look like to faithfully wait in this season? Are we called to wait like the spies, waiting and praying? Are we called to wait like Rahab? What kind of Rahab-like work are we called to do while we wait? And third, and this may inform the second, is to take some time to look at your life from this past month and see what are the unexpected ways and things and people that have come into your life that might shed light on your next step and your journey. Because God promises to show up, but he often shows up in ways we couldn't have imagined. As I've considered this reality of waiting on God and this reality of reinforcing how our relationship with God needs reinforcement, I was drawn to this passage in Romans where Paul says, "He who did not spare his own son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things?" And now, of course, this all things isn't any whim of any desire that we have. For the same reason that parents don't give in to every whim of any desire that our children had, because that would ruin the child. The all things are the all things that God knows that we truly need. The all things come from trusting that God is really our good Father, who's given us the grace of his Son in the past, but continues to give us grace along the journey. And so while we're stuck waiting like Rahab, where we've been visited once, and yet we're waiting for God to come again, we're invited to wait and trust, knowing that our life, this world, is beyond what we can control. But it's not beyond what God can control, what God can do. And so he invites us to trust in him. Let me pray for us.